Hi there, and welcome to Imagine Orem Station area. In this presentation, we'll show you a few things. We'll provide introduction to the project, and then we'll review what we've learned from the public to date by going through survey information and workshop map information. Finally, we'll talk about some next steps. Let's get started. This project has its basis in House Bill 462, aimed at housing affordability. The idea is to maximize development potential in our state in appropriate areas. The good news is that cities and their citizens get to determine how best to meet shared objectives. When we talk about shared objectives, we're talking about regional goals, like increasing the availability and affordability of housing, promoting sustainable environmental conditions, enhancing access to opportunities, whether that's access to day-to-day needs and services or education, and then increasing transportation choices and connections. And here's an aerial image of Orem's Frontrunner Station. You can see the station and a star there at the center, and then we're looking at land within 1/2 mile of that station. The train bisects the station. You see right by the station area there. To the east of that, you see I-15. To the west, you see Geneva Road. Among them, those road networks and train networks, you see single-family neighborhoods, townhome neighborhoods. UVU occupies land east of I-15 as well as just west of the station. There's multifamily to the west of the station itself as well. And then to the southwest edge of the study area, there's a light industrial park. And to the very south end there is agricultural land currently. So that gives you a snapshot of the current uses on the site. Note too, there's a lot of parking, both on UVU land and on land west of the station. So when we think about that station area, we're really tasked with answering the question, what do you imagine? And then thinking through that and creating a vision together. And it's important to think about the context when we're doing visioning. How many people, for example, are expected to live in Utah by 2060? What do you think? We expect our population here in Utah to grow to 5.5 million residents by 2060, and more than 30% of our statewide growth is expected to happen in Utah County. So Orem is really at the epicenter of a good chunk of the growth that our entire state is going to see. So Utah County is expected to add 674,000 residents between 2020 and 2060. We see then that our population will double, reaching about 1.3 million by 2060. And this isn't really unusual. Growth, you can see here, has been a part of our history, and it's certainly going to be a part of our future. And it's interesting to think about where the majority of Utah County's growth will come from. While the rest of the state is experiencing majority growth from immigration, people coming from other places, in Utah County, our growth between now and 2060 is still expected to be majority from natural increase. We have lots of new babies here, and we're living longer. Those are two good things, right? So when we imagine what we can do with a station area, we can think, for instance, about the context, and growth pressure at the station area is very high. We've got I-15, we've got the train corridor, you're in the middle of one of the fastest growing counties in the state. And so when you've got that kind of pressure, creating great places to live in the right location, likely a place where growth pressure is very high like the station area, how you grow matters a lot. And this is the public process that we're engaging in order to create a station area plan for Orem's Frontrunner Station. We held workshops earlier this summer. We'll share what we've learned from those workshops as we move toward creating scenarios or alternative pictures of the future based on what we've learned from the public. We're moving then toward a shared set of goals or a vision, and then implementing that vision. And we've had a lot of engagement and outreach to the public to date. We've had meetings with the Planning Commission and City Council. We've had 3 stakeholder meetings, a public workshop, almost 550 survey responses, 17 workshop maps. We'll show you those today, about 150 workshop participants, and we've conducted outreach through postcards, newsletters, social media, sandwich boards out in the study area, email invitations, etc. So let's take a look at the survey data. Here's what we've learned from the public so far. Again, we had almost 550 responses. The survey was open in June and July. I'll be showing a series of charts that show all of the results, and then we also looked at crosstabs of various categories of survey respondents. We looked, for instance, at those living in a house or a townhouse within the study area, those living in an apartment in the study area, and then people in various age brackets. And we highlight differences between all responses and cross-tabbed participants and noted those differences if it was 10% or greater. So how old are you? You can see we have a nice spread and age range among survey participants. And also a good variety in terms of where people come from. All of Orem is well represented, but also those in the study area. And then we asked, looking out to 2050, what type of place could Orem Station be for the city and or region? And you can see that there wasn't a lot of difference among survey results across these, but generally we're looking at some sort of center or urban village or neighborhood, less interest in a job center, more of a neighborhood kind of a center, people living and a lot of goods and services right there on site. Also, interest in a commuter hub, and you can see that's especially important for those living in a townhome or home in the study area and those over age 45. And then we asked participants a series of questions asking them to gauge the level of importance of various things. So safe pedestrian routes, very important to most people. Safe bike routes, also very important to almost 2/3 of people. Trails connecting the station to other parts of UVU and regional amenities. And you can see that's especially important for people who live in apartments, younger people, less so for older people. Passive green space, peaceful places for walking, sitting, enjoying nature. That's either very important or somewhat important to close to 80% of people, especially important to people who live in apartments. Activities and amenities for families, somewhat or very important to 3/4 of residents. Active green space, so places to play, somewhat or very important to almost 3/4 of participants. Placemaking, creating outdoor gathering places where people want to be. Again, almost 3/4 of people say somewhat or very important when they take the survey. Especially important to people who are younger, less important to people who are older. Ability to move cars more efficiently, 70% somewhat or very important. Affordable housing, over 2/3 saying somewhat or very important. But if you are living in an apartment or are a young person, it's far more important. Feeling the pinch. Activities and amenities for UVU students, about 2/3 somewhat or very important. More so, again, if you live in an apartment on site or are younger. More jobs, just less than 2/3 somewhat or very important. Less so if you're older. More parking garages, close to 2/3 somewhat or very important. Day-to-day needs and services, including retail, 63% somewhat or very important. Activities and amenities for commuters, a little bit lower, somewhat or very important, more so if you live in an apartment or are older. Restaurants and entertainment, 58%, somewhat or very important, more important if you're younger, less important if you're older. Sufficient market rate housing, just over half, somewhat or very important. Reduced surface parking lots, just over half would like to see that, somewhat or very important. Far more important for people who live in an apartment on site, so surrounded by those surface parking lots, or are younger. Developing a unique gateway or destination place, just over half, somewhat or very important. More surface parking lots, less than half say somewhat or very important. Identifiable brand for the station area, only about a third say very or somewhat important. And then we ask participants to consider for themselves, of all the options you just considered, which 3 are the most important. So among that list, among all participants, safe pedestrian routes came out on top, followed by trails, followed by more parking garages, safe bike routes, the ability to move cars more efficiently, affordable housing, and passive green space. And then if we look at where people live in the study area, for townhomes and houses, their top 5 picks are captured in the all to the left there. And apartment dwellers have 2 additional items of importance that pop up: reduced surface parking lots and providing day-to-day needs and services nearby. And then when we look at our age crosstabs, all of those are covered under the all to the left, except for placemaking, which pops up as number 4 for 19 to 29-year-olds. And then among older adults, 45 plus, their top 5s are all included in the top 7 to the left there. So that gives you a sense of what people are thinking are most important in the site. And then finally, we ask some questions about transportation. Do you use Frontrunner or UVX? Only 24% of respondents use it near daily or a couple of times a month, but 65% of those living in apartments use it often. And then do you use the pedestrian bridge over the train tracks and I-15? Not too many do regularly, some do occasionally, and again, apartment dwellers in the study area use it most often. What do you think the top transportation issue is within the station area itself? Coming out on top is better or more frequent transit service. That's especially important for older adults. And then you can see the other options are close to tied. Okay, so that was a look at the survey data that we got from the public. Now let's take a look at workshop maps. Workshop participants completed 17 maps at either a stakeholder meeting or a public workshop on June 22. You can see they worked together in small groups to create a map suggesting their ideal station area in 2050. Participants were asked to work together to place households and jobs in the configuration they would like to see at the study area. In terms of households they placed, across all of the maps, 16% of households that were placed were in stacked 6-plus-story residential buildings with internal parking. What that means is that residential is wrapped around a parking garage, so the parking isn't visible and all you see are residences. The second most was 4 to 5 story residential, again with that internal parking. And then the third pick most often was the 3 to 5 story mixed-use building, including retail ground floor with office and residential above, again with that internal parking. And then you can see other options where higher percentages of households were placed. Single family, 6% of all households placed, for instance. That's number 4. And you can see it goes down from there. And then the jobs placed across all of the maps, almost a third of them were placed in 3 to 5 story mixed-use retail, office, residential buildings, again with internal parking, and 6+ story, again mixed-use retail, office, residential buildings with internal parking, followed by flex office or light industrial buildings, and then retail and neighborhood retail rounding out that list. And then looking at it another way, if we look at the most acres allotted to various land uses across these maps, are single-family homes. They naturally take up a lot more acreage than, say, stacked multi-story homes. So 102 acres placed in single-family homes. Townhomes or mansion homes followed by stacked 3 to 5 story mixed-use retail, office, and residential parking. And you can see the list going down from there. Destination spaces or buildings. The top spaces that were placed on maps included a retail or entertainment district, an institutional building like a building up at UVU, and then you can see cultural destinations, recreation destinations, and university destinations. Again, those are all the destination spaces or buildings that were placed on the maps and how many times they were placed. And then parking. You see the top pick most used was a shared parking garage, followed by a shared parking garage with a commercial wrap, so townhouses maybe on top hiding the garage, again retail ground floor also hiding that garage, and then third, surface parking lots. Popular placemaking included parks like neighborhood park or a small pocket park, plazas, skating ribbons or rinks, green spaces, playgrounds, preserved agriculture or orchards, and the trail out to the lake. Now, in terms of existing neighborhoods, most maps adamantly said no change to those existing residential areas, and we want to respect that. The only change we saw proposed on some of the maps were adding in detached accessory dwelling units, so like a granny flat or a small tiny home or something in someone's backyard, and looking at that as an option. But otherwise, no change in existing residential areas. And then industrial areas, to the bottom left of the map there, people aren't seeing much change there either. And then you can see Geneva Road kind of running north to south in the study area, paralleling the train and I-15. In the bottom left corner, there's a large, mostly vacant parcel there. It's used for agriculture currently. And we saw people treat that in various ways. So you can see in these maps, the yellow represents housing and the little green dots represent green space. And so we saw a number of maps that included mostly single family or cottage homes, maybe some townhomes, maybe a bit of multifamily. That's, I think, the orange there, and pairing that up with green space. So that was one concept, housing and green space for Geneva. And then we saw a concept where people paired housing and retail. So that's housing in the orange and the yellow, and then retail along Geneva Road there in red. We also saw a number of maps including green space, whether that's farmland or recreation. And then we saw some maps include industrial or office. Looking at another part of the map, covering the station area itself and that University Parkway on the north side. Here are some of the concepts. The first batch of maps here, we call it kind of station area light. There's just kind of a smattering of retail, hotel, parking garage, some single family, some 3 to 5 story multifamily, some green space, and some things to do. Then we saw another batch of maps that really worked at kind of a strong village concept, mostly multifamily and mixed-use buildings, some townhouses, often some wrapped parking garages, generally an emphasis on both the station and also University Parkway just south of the station there. Again, these are all maps created at public workshops or stakeholder workshops. So those are concepts we generally saw when people focused on the station and University Parkway. And then there were a number of maps that combined looking at the station and University Parkway, but also at UVU land east of I-15. So let's take a look at that as well. So finally, this batch of maps includes not only the station area on the west side of I-15, but also land on UVU campus. And it includes mixed-use buildings, lots of multifamily housing, and a destination street with lots of things to do, access to day-to-day needs and services. And then finally, we took a close look at the northeast corner, another place where people spent time thinking about how the area could grow and change. Let's take a look at that. So in that northeast corner of the study area, we see a mix of things. So on the left, you see a batch of maps that really show with those green dots the idea of preserving that land. And then in the center, a column of maps that includes single-family development with some green space, so maybe clustering development in order to create some green space pockets within it. We also see some multifamily with green space on the top there, and then the bottom right, we see simply single family filling in. So when we look across both the survey data and the data from all the maps that the public created, we see some big ideas starting to rise to the top. So in regard to residential neighborhoods, really a strong preference to preserve existing neighborhoods as they are, with the exception of maybe looking at adding in detached accessory dwelling units. Then when new neighborhoods are developed, often the desire is to develop those with green space, pocket parks, things like that. Next, there was a strong use of mixed-use villages around the Frontrunner Station, around University Parkway, and sometimes on UVU campus itself, east of I-15. Those villages tended to include notes about both market rate and affordable housing, parking garages, often with a commercial wrap, reduced surface lots, a destination street or maybe buildings that could include retail, entertainment, institutional, and hotels, and placemaking, maybe ice skating ribbons or rinks, a plaza, dog parks, trails, those kinds of things. And then retail was also often identified, especially along Geneva, sometimes in the mixed-use village. And then green spaces throughout. We saw mentions of preserving orchard space, passive space, and also active parks. Trails and pathways were commonly identified amongst other development land uses, both for connections and for pedestrian and bike safety. We saw that as a strong survey result as well. And then roads, identified to be efficient and then safe for multiple transportation modes. So that wraps up what we've learned so far from survey data and workshop map data. Let's take a look at next steps. So again, as a reminder, we had a public workshop in June. We're now working on creating alternative scenarios or pictures of the future based on what we learned from the public. We'll be bringing those scenarios to the public at an open house in October. We'll ask people, what are your preferences? We'll ask them to evaluate the scenarios as we work toward then a vision, a set of shared goals, and then finally adoption. So thank you for your interest in Imagine Orem, Orem Station area. Look forward to attending that next workshop scheduled at this time for October 12th. Thanks for your interest.